Well, we were just preparing for like 50, 55 solid minutes of Northwestern breakdown from you, Steve.
Oh man, I don't know that much about Northwestern to fill
I
55
don't
minutes.
think any of us
I
do.
can tell you that Ohio State and Northwestern, their last game was against the same team. Northwestern defeated Purdue 26-20 in overtime 2 weeks ago, and Ohio State this past Saturday beat Purdue 45-0. So I don't know if you want to compare those scores. I don't know if they have any other common opponents, but my guess is if they did, Ohio State beat those teams by a wider margin than Northwestern did. But that would take some advanced preparation for me to look through and see what that is.
They have played. They lost 40-14 to Iowa right before the Purdue game. It was interesting. I was like, I should probably watch some Northwestern. I haven't watched them at all. And then I'm watching them against Purdue. I'm like, oh yeah, I watched this. I've already seen this. I watched this in preparation for Purdue, and I had forgotten that I'd watched it because it's kind of, I guess that's indicative. That's a good descriptor of Northwestern a little bit, is that they are somewhat forgettable. They'll run two quarterbacks like Ohio State has seen in the past, however many weeks now, and well, they won't necessarily see it next week, but they'll probably see it against Michigan. So that you got the running quarterback and you got the less running quarterback. I don't know that either of them are necessarily the throwers, but so you've got that, and it's not a great offense for Northwestern. It's not a very good defense. They are somehow 4-5, but I think that's indicative of the lower half of the Big Ten, because I guess everybody is lower half of the Big Ten outside of the top four, right?
Well, Northwestern seems to have like an exposure rate of, especially when Pat Fitzgerald was there, that nobody pays attention to him. And then the last weekend of the season, people start commenting and figuring out, oh, Northwestern could make it to the Big Ten championship game. And then they're there and they lose by 3 touchdowns, and then nobody remembers them. And then during the offseason, people will talk at times about what a great coach Pat Fitzgerald is. And then we start the next season and it's kind of this sleepy, nobody pays attention to him. And unfortunately, last year, of course, they were coming off 1-11 in the big debacle and fiasco with Fitzgerald, and David Braun takes over. But Iowa took command of the division, so they just kind of laid low and they were out of it. Nobody talked about them. Then everybody at the end of the season kind of realized Northwestern's, they're decent. This is kind of remarkable. They went 8-5. They beat Utah in a bowl game and talked about them for a few days, and then back to obscurity.
They go to the Big Ten championship game twice in 2018 and 2020. In 2020, the COVID year, they gave Ohio State a really tough game there. I think they lost by 3 touchdowns. The other one, that was kind of the Terry McLaurin showcase at Lucas Oil Stadium game, as I recall. And Northwestern had that little pocket of 5,000 people over in the corner on their sideline, that was for them. And then whatever else was there, most of them were Ohio State people. Just as I feel it will be on Saturday at 11 a.m. Central Time. They drew 41,000 people they've played 3 games there since 2010, and they drew as many as 41,000 people, I think, for one of those 3 games. And my guess is the Ohio State people have come in and bought up about 25 or 30,000 of those tickets and will overrun Wrigleyville early and late on Saturday with the revelry. And I mean, you get to go to the Wrigley bars and watch college football for the rest of the day. That seems like a lot of fun. So yeah, too bad we'll be working, Tony. But it is what it is.
There'll be a lot of Buckeye fans there that do not have tickets that are just going to be in and around the area, and you may hear them from the rooftops as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know if Northwestern has played any more games or any other games at Wrigley this year? Because obviously they made the right decision that, okay, this is the team that we moved to Wrigley Field, because otherwise they're playing like in their little soccer field on the corner of the lake in front of 8,000 people.
They couldn't until, the prospect that the Cubs could be in the playoffs. Which maybe you knew that in August, but at any rate, they can't schedule any October games there because you'd have to transfer it over to football back to baseball. They don't want to do that. So they're limited pretty much to November games at Wrigley Field. And so they've got this one, and they will play Illinois in 2 weeks, the final week of the season, which that's kind of a fitting one for them to play Illinois, their rivalry game there in Chicago. They've played 3 games there previously. They're 0-3 all time at Wrigley Field from my crack research staff. And there was one of them in 2010. I think the first one was against Illinois in 2010. And then there have been a couple of them, I want to say like 21 and 23, something like that. They've played there and lost both those games as well. So, so it'll be a unique setting. I mean, when you think about it, our country, we've got, hang on one second. I need to go. You guys take it for a minute and I'll come back with a couple of thoughts on Wrigley, but.
No, I'm definitely looking forward to it. This will be the first year, I believe, that they can put the teams on opposite sidelines because they've continued to reconfigure some things. So, and the Buckeyes will get there on Friday. They normally don't do Friday stadium walkthroughs, but because this is a unique experience and they want to know what they're walking into, they'll actually go check it out Friday when they land in Chicago. So they'll make that, 4-hour drive from the airport to Wrigleyville to check out the stadium and the confines there. And Ryan Day said on Tuesday that at halftime they'll just be going to the bullpen rather than like the locker room, and so they're going to show them where they'll be going there and all of that stuff. So it's a very unique thing, and there's been a little bit of talk about history, but more talk about just executing and things like that. All of the football stuff, but football has been going on at Wrigley for almost a century now. So this is nothing new, but it is certainly unique. It's going to be a bucket list item for yours truly. That's for sure.
Awesome. Most of those highlights, folks, that you see on YouTube now or saw with NFL Films back in the day with Gale Sayers and Dick Butkus, much of that at Wrigley Field, because Soldier Field, I know that Dick Butkus played until 71, and he played at Soldier Field for maybe a season or 2. So all those highlights from the 60s and before, of course, at Wrigley Field. Tony, do you remember the odd configuration and the issue with the very first game at Wrigley, or the first modern game at Wrigley?
Right. And what was it? The wall was too close to the back of the end zone in one of those. So they just, once you got to the 50, you had to turn and basically play half court football. And that was unique for sure.
And it wasn't just that it was dangerous. The corner of the end zone actually went into the wall, and so it didn't even finish the corner. It was like kind of like just not by much, but maybe like a foot. It was rounded off. It was hilarious. So yeah, they would move. Everybody would kick off in the same direction. So the only issue was a scoop and score or pick six, and I guess nobody really monitored. Okay, if somebody's got a pick six, they're in the clear. They're not going to be run into the corner of the end zone. So
how did they think that was going to be okay?
I don't know. They had to have laid out the field well in advance. And again, we're not talking about something that happened in 1950. This was like 2005 or something like that.
I know that. Thank you for bringing me back. I think, just as a history lesson, the Chicago Cardinals, I think, were the team that got to play at Soldier Field. So the Bears, up until 70 or 71, had 50 seasons at Wrigley Field, and they've now had 50 seasons at Soldier Field. So that's kind of a unique distinction that they played in 2 stadiums for 50 years each. But people don't really, there are very few people, old enough to remember that the Bears, played. I mean, you'd have to be in your 70s probably to remember that the Bears played at Wrigley Field, to have actively watched it. The field ran, I believe, from left field to home plate, whereas in this incarnation, it runs from home plate to right field. And in the 2010 game, you still had the third base dugout was there. What they did when they renovated the stadium is they made the third base dugout removable for special events like this. And now you can have an entire 100-yard football field. The issue was there was no buffer between the the inline, and you have that yard basically of white paint. There was no buffer behind the yard of white paint. So, you running a go route, to catch the ball in the back of the end zone, you're going to slam into the fence. Well, now they've at least got 6 feet behind each thing and padding, I presume, to protect the players who are running those kind of routes. I guess that's the only time something like this would come into play, is when you're running routes into those end zones. And they just, in that 2010 game, Jim Delaney went out there and looked at it and said, he was the first one that raised the question and said, this isn't going to work. It's like that woman on the insurance company. It's not going to fit. Steven, it's not going to fit. And so they came up with the solution, very novel, to run every possession going toward home plate. So on a punt, they'd have to walk the ball all the way to the other end of the field and, go the other direction. So those poor people in the right field stands, they did get to see a defensive touchdown come their way in that game, but otherwise they were kind of, unless the ball was backed up at the 5-yard line, they didn't get much action in their end. So very interesting. And again, a slice of Americana, like the Rose Bowl, maybe Yankee Stadium, I don't know. But, I want to go down before the game if they'll let us and stand where home plate is and point out to right field like Babe Ruth did. And, that's one. Obviously, the Bears played there, and they won NFL championships playing there in the 50s, 60s, whatever. And this is a little known thing that people don't recall, but Pete Rose tied the Ty Cobb record at Wrigley Field, and then he broke it at Cincinnati. So that was kind of a neat thing. And obviously, just recently, the Cubs and the Indians, before they became the Guardians, played in the World Series there. So I've probably been there 10 times for Cubs games, a few Reds Cubs games, or maybe more than 10 times. And the neat thing about it is, if you're going as a fan, typically you can go to the bars beforehand, go into the game, and then go back to the bars afterward and spend the entire day at Wrigleyville if you want. So a lot of good restaurants and bars right around. And the Cubs, or whoever their developer is, off the third base line, it used to just be a street. Well, they closed that part of the street and put in a new development over there with even more bars and restaurants to make it even better. So, it's just a fabulous place to go. I mean, the stadium, people who are used to all the amenities at the new stadiums will walk in and say, this is a dump. But then you realize you're at Wrigley Field. So, it's kind of a trade-off.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment or analyze Harry Carey's broadcasting ability, because that would be mean. And may he rest in peace. He was a legend and an icon. So we'll put that aside, because even from the age of 10 or 12, I was like, is this guy really good at what he does? Anyway.
Steve, look at all the Japanese.
It's Mark Gruzalanik. It's not that difficult to pronounce. Anyway, but to come home from school and to be able to flip on the Cubs, who just started at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, was just, there was few things better than that.
And in '84, when they were going for their first, playoff berth in a million years, they just kind of took the world by storm. 83, 84, it was in that range. It may have been 83 was the year they got in the playoffs. I don't know, but
84.
84. Rick
Leon
Sutcliffe,
Durham right through his legs.
Leon Durham, Rick Sutcliffe, Ryan Sandberg. I think that
Bobby Dernier.
Bob Dernier. Yeah.
I think that was before Dunston.
Ron Say. Did you say
Ron
Ron Say in third?
Keith Moreland.
I think he knocked in 90 runs. Keith Moreland. Real Estate Moreland, I think, was Chris Berman's name for.
Talking about Harry Carey, and one of my favorite things is Tony Perez Chica, pronouncing that, and then say, how would you pronounce that backwards? And then, like, as the game is going on, he's trying to pronounce Perez Chica backwards, and it's like there's a screaming double to right field, and he's like, as a Parizapa app, and it's like, well,
they lose a game on a bases loaded, or they win the game on a bases loaded ball. Hey, he balked. Cubs win. It's like,
that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Oh my God.
We will talk some football here eventually, folks. And my editor is going to watch this and say, finally talk some Ohio State. I need some clips here.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But I got to get this in since we went there. Yes, the trade of June of '84 sent Rick Sutcliffe from my beloved Indians to the Cubs, who went 16-1 and won the Cy Young Award that year for Mel Hall and Joe Carter.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey,
Did pretty
Joe
well
Carter
for the Indians. Oh, yeah.
did well. Of course, then on to Toronto. They parlayed him onto Toronto for what? Ralimar and
Oh, that was a big trade.
yeah, that was a biggie. That was a
All
good
right,
one.
folks. Appreciate you being here. Leave those comments and questions. So the Buckeyes roll 45-0. You guys have probably long since forgotten about that game. I know I have to a certain extent, but throw that all together with what you learned this week from Ryan Day and the rest of the crew. What is big to look out for this week?
I'll jump in and just talk about the deep ball, the deep passing, which was not great again this past week. And Ryan Day was asked about it, and Chip Kelly was asked about it, and Will Howard was asked about it. And the consensus is that it's just footwork at this point, not getting set quickly enough to get some of those shots downfield. And so that's that. When the footwork is there, the ball is there. He just needs to get his feet set and cut it loose, basically, and try to overthrow receivers. And he said he tried to get a little too cute with the Carnell Tate thing, and then you saw it get hung up. I think at that point the wind may have been blowing against that pass at that time, so that also didn't help. But I still think I go back to Ryan Day telling us 2 weeks or so ago that if Jeremiah Smith is running a route and he's even with the safety, just throw it as far as you can. Just go ahead. Doesn't matter what else is going on. Just throw it as far as you can because the safety's not going to stay with him. And so it's been, 9 games now, and Will Howard is still trying to process that. But I also think he's not necessarily seeing things as quickly as they're happening because he saw the Carnell Tate thing a little bit late. If he would have seen it earlier, he could have really stepped into that one. And, you can only throw the ball so far if you don't see it quickly enough. So I think getting set earlier, making sure that that's the read you're looking for, and just uncorking it, and you'll do okay. But overall, he's completed 80% of his passes in 5 games this season. That's something that CJ Stroud never did. Dwayne Haskins never did it. Justin Fields never did it. Like, this is something that is incredibly rare at Ohio State. I don't know that anybody's ever done it. He's a 74% passer this year. He came into Ohio State as a 59% career passer. So we're absolutely nitpicking at this point with Will Howard. But when you get into these better games, you better hit the deep shots because those are free yards, and those might be the only touchdowns you get.
Yeah, my 2 cents was it was a workmanlike performance by Ohio State. I wanted to see them kind of come in and blow Purdue out of the water, and it was only 7-0 at the end of the first quarter, but business did pick up in the second quarter, 21-0. And instead of the Nebraska game where they let Nebraska hang around for 60 minutes, you didn't want to have that let down. You wanted to be up. And Caden Curry provided some early juice with a blocked punt. They'd seen that Purdue was using smaller guys in the pass protectors, the guys behind the line of scrimmage in front of the punter. And they were able to put a couple bigger guys in there with some agility, Caden Curry and Mitchell Melton, to kind of shove those guys back into the rugby punter. And then Caden Curry was able to get off of that and block the punt. Ohio State had the ball at the 8-yard line. Yes, it took them 4 ill-advised plays to find the end zone. I think Howard carried on 3 of them, which is, maybe 2 too many. I don't know. But I love the last one, though. He faked the give to Judkins, who went through the hole over the right guard, which he probably would have scored standing up anyway, and then followed him in. So Judkins is now a blocker for him, and no doubt he scored standing up. So that was a tremendous play call, tremendous design, at least on that one. And as the game went on, I thought that Howard was very strong. I've harped for weeks about how you have to live with 2 galactically colossal mistakes by Will Howard week in and week out. He skipped that part this week and went right to effective, productive football. So that was good for him. Only missed on 5 passes. Was sacked 1 time when he probably could have thrown the ball away. It was more of a coverage sack. But I felt that he played one of his better games. Jeremiah Smith, his fingerprints were all over this. Again, nice game for him. Travion Henderson had a huge game. And defensively, over the last 3 games, the teams have averaged 250 yards. So that's what Penn State, Nebraska, and Purdue, or whatever order that was in. And then I guess it would have been Nebraska, Penn State, Purdue was the order. 250 yards over the last 3 games. And those 3 teams have scored a combined 30 points. And 7 of those was on a pick 6 by Penn State that wasn't even against the Ohio State defense. So their defense has given up 23 points in 3 games, which is just shy of 8 points a game. You're going to win a lot of football games when your defense only gives up 8 points a game. In fact, you're going to win about 99.9% of the games that you play when you only give up 8 points. So to me, it feels like this team is really starting to come together. This was a much better performance, albeit against a really bad Purdue team, than what we saw against Nebraska. And there was no let up. There was no nothing that made you scratch your head and say, what are they doing that for? Plus, in the second half, they got a ton of guys, great reps. Like JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer played one of their best games ever. And according to the snap count I saw, they each only were in like the mid-20s in snap count. That's what everybody's been dying for. Keep those guys to the 30 most important plays that you need them for and get great production for those 30 plays, and then let some other fresh guys play. And boy, they probably had a bigger impact on that game playing 30 plays than they did in most games where they play 60. So those were some of my takeaways from it. Very positive, hard to come away with anything, and took care of business. And obviously, when 3 and 4 lose in the playoff rankings with Georgia and Miami, you've solidified your spot at number 2. You're not coming out of there anytime soon. Barring, a terrible performance or a loss. And it's all set up on the table for them. Northwestern, Indiana, Michigan, and potentially Oregon again. I don't know what the tiebreaker is between Penn State and Indiana, since they, I guess, don't play each other. I get maybe it's records of their, Big Ten opponents, perhaps. I don't know. But Indiana, for all intents and purposes, will come to Ohio State next week playing for a spot in the Big Ten championship game, because you have to assume they're going to go back home in the final week and beat Purdue just like Ohio State just did. So they're going to end up, with undefeated if they beat Ohio State, and they would go in as an undefeated Big Ten team if they beat Ohio State, obviously. So they are playing for a spot in the championship game next week, and they've had, up until this past week, it's been just, one easy win after another. Michigan, I know, Tony, you probably studied it much closer than I did, but Michigan played a great second half and made them earn it. But that's kind of where we're at right now. Don't want to get caught looking too far ahead to Indiana, but that is one subplot of that game next week. Indiana's not just playing to get to 11-0 and maybe get to the playoffs or whatever. They're playing for a shot at their a realistic shot at their first Big Ten championship since 1967. So that's some pretty heady stuff too.